Hello, Life Group leaders. I'm Gary Briggs. We're going to be looking at Session 7 on page 60. We've been studying about the kings. Now we're studying about Elijah and the prophet and how important he was in the story here that we've been in our Life Group lessons. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 19. The verses are in the book are 9 through 18. But I've got to say, again, like I've done in the past, you've got to start at verse 1. The verses 1 through 8 give the basis, the foundation for today's lesson. So it's about Elijah, and a word that we'll talk about a lot today and how it affected him is the word fear. And actually the power of that emotion that actually overcame his good judgment, his good thinking, his attitude and approach, and that's what today's lesson's about. The title of the lesson is Hope. There is hope. In fact, it says focusing on God's purposes brings hope out of despair. So Elijah was feeling some fear, some despair. Kind of amazing. It'd be easy to throw him under the bus a little bit and question how that could happen. And I'll actually do that a little bit. We know in the lesson prior to this one about one person, Elijah, against 450 prophets of Baal, and the story about the water and the stones and the sacrifice, the bulls on the altar, everything being consumed, an amazing miracle from God and display from God as to what happened. And even right before chapter 19, another miracle where Elijah had supernatural power to run ahead of Ahab, his chariot and horses. And so there's a lot of things that God has shown Elijah through his ministry, his time as a prophet, miracles from flour and oil and the miracle we just talked about, to show and display who the true God was, not the God of Baal, but the true living God, and how the people fell on their face prostrate and cried out, "The Lord is God, is the Lord." And so in today's lesson, again, starting off in verse 1, let me go there in my Bible. And here we see the story. Ahab, which was a terrible king, a very wicked king over Israel. His wife Jezebel was equally wicked, but he went home and told her everything that Elijah had done with the prophets of Baal, and she didn't like that. In fact, she then said in verse 2, so Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." So I'm going to kill you, Elijah, is what she's saying, in 24 hours or less. So that was her anger towards him based on what he had done, because she was a worshiper of Baal, and so was Ahab. Well, verse 3 is where we pick up this word I mentioned, fear. It says, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. It's like all of a sudden fear overcame him when he heard Jezebel's threat to kill him, and he took off. He ran for his life. And if you read on down, you can see he didn't run just a little bit. He went miles and miles and literally thousands of footsteps away from where he was supposed to be and into a different city, a different part, even into the desert. 40 days, it says, even that he went into the desert. So I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but the word fear, we've all heard, there's a couple of responses, sometimes 2 or 3. It's fight, flight, freeze. In this situation, when fear overcame Elijah, instead of fighting, he did the flighting. He took off. He ran. So 2 possible reactions there, but he ran for his life. And again, we review some of the miraculous things that God had done to him and through him and for him. And it's like, how could he be so afraid? Yes, Jezebel was a wicked queen and Ahab a wicked king, Ahab, but why was he so quick to become so fearful? He had, again, seen everything God had done through him. And so the whole time that he was running from the situation, we see that God was with him. When he should have ran to God, he ran away from the situation. The one thing you see that he didn't do, he didn't turn to God in prayer and say, help me. He didn't fall on his face or his knees to say, Lord, this is a terrible threat from Jezebel. He didn't do that. He said he just got up and ran for his life. So we know we can learn life lessons from mistakes we make, but we can also learn from mistakes other people make if we're willing. And that's what we tell our kids and our friends, that don't do what I did, do what I learned, some of the things, and hopefully they'll take that advice and learn from that. And so today's lesson with what Elijah did would be an example for us to learn to take a different approach than he did when the enemy, which was Jezebel, his enemy, and spiritual warfare again, the good against the bad, when the worshipers of idols, Ahab, Jezebel, and lots of the people in Israel, they were kind of the warfare, the enemy to God. So we see through the text, and I'm not going to read every word, but you can study that and see how he went. And he actually prayed to die. He was so distraught, so fearful, that he started to have what I call his pity party. He was poor little me. I'm the only one in Israel. All the other prophets have been killed. The people don't respond like I want them to my sermons, my message as a prophet. He felt overwhelmed, and every step he took, every mile he walked, I'm sure he rehearsed his excuses over and over again as to why he was running away from the situation and not looking and turning toward God. But he might have been running away, but God was with him. In fact, we see that God provided through the angels, provided his provision. They brought him food and water. We see that God was very patient with him. The angels here in verse 5 says the angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and by his head was a cake of bread and a jar of water. So again, another miracle. He didn't cook or bring the water, but God provided that through the angels to him, a provision. And God was patient with him. It says in verse 9, God asked a simple question, but I think he was trying to get Elijah's attention. He says, "What are you doing here? Like, what's going on, Elijah? Why are you here? What's your purpose for being here, away from where you're supposed to be?" And this is where Elijah responded, again, kind of his pity party excuse. "I've been very zealous for the Lord. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." So in his mind, he had convinced himself he was the last remaining follower of God. Now we find out later that's not true, but that's what, again, like you use the word maybe kind of harsh, but the word excuse that he had. So he made it to this big journey, Mount Horeb, found a cave, was hiding in the cave, and the presence of the Lord was there. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And I think what God was trying to do is get his attention. So we see three things, three displays of God's power. There was an earthquake. First, there was a wind, a mighty wind that it blew so hard it shattered the rocks of the mountain. Then there was an earthquake. And then following that was a fire. All of these to get Elijah's attention, to show who really has the power over creation. And then an interesting verse, and we've seen this, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. In King James, I like it. It says, a still small voice. In NIV, it says, and after the fire came a gentle whisper. God didn't shout. He didn't scream at Elijah. He just whispered. And through all the earthquake, the fire, the wind, listening with Elijah talking about his reasons that he was fearful and had to leave, his excuse that he gave, not once but twice he repeated the same thing when God asked him, why are you here, Elijah? Finally, it appears, and this isn't in the Bible, but I wrote it down on my notes, he had to stop talking, stop complaining, stop justifying, and stop feeling sorry for himself. And once he finally was able to do that, he listened and heard that still small voice. And we know from our own experience it's impossible to listen while you're talking. And that's what happened with Elijah. There was a lot of noise in his life, a lot of things in his brain going on, a lot of emotional anxiety, that powerful emotion of fear had overcome him. And once he finally relaxed and listened to what God was saying, he heard what God was saying. And what did God tell him? He said, go back the way you came. I don't know what you're doing here. You don't even know what you're doing here. He asked the question, and I don't think Elijah even answered, other than to rehearse his feeling sorry for himself. And he said, go back the way you came. He said, I'm not going to answer your prayer to die. You're not going to die. I'm not going to let Jezebel kill you. 24 hours had already passed, and he was still alive. None of her messengers, prophets, hitmen had found him. In fact, he told him, I've still got work for you to do. I've got some other things, and you're to appoint another king and another prophet to succeed you. And that's on down in some of the verses there. And what was interesting, I thought of an old saying, when Elijah thought he was the last one remaining, he wasn't. And so wrong facts can lead to wrong conclusions, which lead to wrong actions, which produce wrong results. So he needed to, and likewise we need to make sure we have our facts straight. He wasn't the only remaining believer in God. So God actually had a plan, and you think, well, here's Jezebel and Ahab, the wicked king and queen, who wanted to kill him. God knew what was going to happen, God's sovereignty, and so it's interesting in 1 Kings 21, I'll read this real quick, 21 verses 20 through 23, kind of what happens to Ahab and Jezebel. Do they kill Elijah? What happens here? And you can fast forward a little bit. It says, Ahab said to Elijah, so you have found me, my enemy. So Ahab is referring to Elijah as his enemy. And he responded, yes, I have found you because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. I'm going to bring disaster on you. And I'm reading this, that didn't sound like a fearful, very bold. Elijah's speaking out. He has snapped out of this emotional panic here. I'm going to bring disaster on you. I will consume your descendants and cut off Ahab, every last male of Israel, slave or free. I will make your house like that of Jeroboam, because you have provoked me to anger and have caused Israel to sin. And oh, by the way, Verse 23, and also concerning Jezebel, the Lord says, dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. So God had a plan to take care of Ahab and Jezebel, and he was going to carry that out through the prophet Elijah. So what I was thinking then, as I was kind of reading and praying and coming up with our so what can we use to apply to our lives from this lesson? What is there? Do we ever become like Elijah, paralyzed in fear? Or do we experience the emotion of fear? Well, and we all know the answer is yes. Sometimes the enemy that we fear can be a pending surgery, it can be a cancer diagnosis, financial problems, marital separation, divorce, kids with substance abuse problem. I mean, it can be a host of anything that really we just don't know what to do and how to go about it. So we, like Elijah, have two choices. We can either fight or flee. We can run and deal with it the wrong way, or we can run away from the situation, or better yet, we can run to God. And that's really the right way. Sadly, Elijah didn't choose that initially with this set of verses we looked at today. So what I'd like to conclude with is some ideas that you can throw out to the class, or maybe list. I've got several verses here. And again, verses are good to have, but it's really the meaning of the verses and God's promises in these verses. Instead of being fearful, in Psalms 46:10, again, under the heading listening, it says, be still and know that I am God. Sometimes until we relax, we're still, we calm down our nerves, our emotions, and listen and realize that God is there and He's with us. So Proverbs 46:10. Another familiar verse that is one of my favorites, Proverbs 3:5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, because a lot of times our understanding is based on fear. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Then we think of the 23rd Psalm, verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. What a great verse. Another familiar one that you might want to have some of your class look up, Jeremiah 17, verse 7 and 8. But blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in Him. He will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear. When heat comes, its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. What a great verse. Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Joshua 1:9 says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. In the New Testament, we know and should have memorized Philippians 4:6 and 7. Be anxious. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and petition with thanksgiving. It's always interesting that we're to be thankful even in times that we could be anxious, but don't be anxious. With thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds, even our emotional state. The peace of God will keep us from being fearful. 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. If you're anxious, fearful, just cast it, give it to God. And then Another great verse, Romans 8:31. What then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? So, in conclusion, again, fight or flee. We can use God's power to fight off fear, fight off the enemy, fight off our anxieties. He's there with us if we choose to turn to Him. So I've written down 5 or 6 bullets here in conclusion. Number 1, recognize fear for what it is. It's an emotion, a powerful emotion that can literally paralyze you if you let it. Nip it in the bud as soon as possible. Once you sense fear's coming on again, whatever the situation, you can't dilly-dally. You gotta take action and nip it in the bud. Run to God in prayer. Don't run away from the situation and hide or wilt in panic or fear. And the reason we have LifeGroup, you're doing life with a group of people. Reach out to your LifeGroup friends for prayer support, friendship. And then the final bullet is always remember God loves you and has your best interest in mind. So that's my take on the lesson. You see that Elijah became overcome with fear and ran, but God was with him the whole time, provided provision, and he's very patient with him, brought him back, got his attitude correct there, and helped strengthen him and told him, go back the way you came. So we can learn from Elijah in this lesson today that fear is a powerful emotion, and we've got to be quick to deal with that in the proper way by turning to God. And these verses are great verses I read to reassure us that God has our best interest in mind. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up and hope you have a good lesson. Thank you.